Good day to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook for today, Saturday, May 9th, 2026. And on this week's video, as I promised, I'm going to take a close look at what is to be expected for the Pacific hurricane season, which is coming up next week. Next week is the start of the Pacific hurricane season, May 15th. Time is already flying by very quickly, I know. And I'm focusing on the Pacific this week because usually with our weekly tropical weather outlook videos, we tend to focus on the Atlantic because that's, I believe, where my main audience is. But I'm pretty sure that I have some viewers as well from the Pacific, and I don't want to leave you guys in the dust. And especially given, if you've been paying attention to the last few weeks, we've been talking about the potential of a very strong El Nino coming this year. It is going to help set the stage for what could possibly be, as I'll show you in a little bit, a very active Pacific hurricane season incoming, and I'm going to show you why. We're going to take a look at some factors for this year, and we're going to take a look at past Pacific hurricane seasons with the kind of setup that we're expecting for this year. So a lot to go over today. Hope you enjoy it. We're going to have a long, nice video discussion, and I'm going to try to break everything down in as detailed of a manner as I possibly can. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let's start off, as we typically do every single week, by taking a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Pacific and the Atlantic. And in the Atlantic, things are actually, slowly warming up. We've seen warming occur in the Eastern Atlantic here over the last several weeks as we've had a negative NAO, and that's really allowed for things to finally warm up throughout the Atlantic. And I think that's probably going to continue for the next 2 weeks. And I mean, it's just generally the trend that as we get towards the summertime, even if the Atlantic was cooler during the spring, as the African monsoon turns on, it generally allows for trades to weaken and generally for sea surface temperature anomalies begin to arise by the time we get to the summer. And especially in the Caribbean, and closer to home here near the southeast, things have also been very, very warm as well. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico, very warm and above normal, but especially here near Florida, very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies there. But of course, where is it warmest right now? It is in the Pacific. And boy, must I tell you, the Pacific is very, very warm right now. Probably one of the warmest I've seen it in quite a long time, and it's all because of our developing El Nino that we have here, which you could clearly see the signature of beginning to show up nicely here along the equatorial Pacific. And as I'll show you here with the Nino 3.4 values, first off, let me show you the regular Nino 3.4 that I've been showing you, because there's actually a little bit of a difference in the maps here. Alex Borham from Cyclonic Weather introduced a new map, and I'll show you it in a little bit, but a bunch of oranges shaded in throughout the pretty much almost the entire equatorial Pacific right now. El Nino is really beginning to show up nicely, as we thought it would, because we thought El Nino would develop, and boy, its development is coming on strong now. And taking a look at the latest Nino 3.4 index, we are now at 0.9 degrees Celsius. And that is already nearing, in terms of technical standards, we are already near moderate El Nino threshold. But of course, that is with the daily sea surface temperature anomalies. In reality, El Nino takes a little bit longer to be declared officially by NOAA. Usually conditions have to be present for at least 3 months. So we're probably not going to see El Nino officially declared until we get to about July or so. But conditions are already rapidly becoming present, and especially look at the last few weeks here and see how the Nino 3.4 index on a daily basis has really risen, especially from April. El Nino is definitely developing, and it's coming on strong for sure. But it's very interesting because we have this map here. This is the Nino 3.4 map from the NOAA Coral Reef Watch, and this is a raw average of the sea surface temperature anomalies here in the Pacific based off of this map, which is also the NOAA Coral Reef Watch. This graph here is literally just a raw average of what you see here combined into one number, so we don't have to look at this map and kind of make a guess as to what the value is here in the Central Pacific, Nino 3.4 area, which, as you could obviously see, is definitely very warm. But as you know, the NOAA Climate Prediction Center has recently begun using the relative Nino 3.4 index. So they've been using a new methodology that kind of is supposed to account a little bit for the recent events of warming, which has been happening globally, and it has an effect on ENSO. And so the whole point of the methodology is to kind of take out any sort of warming bias that our current methodology has. So with the relative Nino index, we go from 0.9 degrees Celsius to, comparing it to what the relative Nino shows for the latest index, we go all the way down from 0.9 to 0.3. Maybe you could round it up, though, to 0.4. But it's very interesting nonetheless. We have now both methodologies that we could use to compare and contrast. And Alex Boreham recently just introduced the relative Nino 3.4 index to cyclonic weather, and it's definitely going to be a very interesting thing that we will use, and we will kind of, maybe as the weeks go on and we kind of compare and contrast and see how things are developing with El Nino, it'll be nice to compare the two and see the difference, especially, because of the methodology. And usually, and I said this before, but usually, for some reason, the relative Nino 3.4 ends up always being at least half a degree Celsius lower than what the raw data is. And you can actually see that reflected right now. But nonetheless, still, on both maps here, the sea surface temperatures have been warming up quite a bit over the last several weeks, and probably in just a matter of a few weeks here, the relative Nino index for sure is going to hit the official 0.5 degrees Celsius threshold, like we've already reached here on the regular Coral Reef Watch Nino 3.4 index. But either way, El Nino is definitely coming. It's just a matter of what methodology you use, and definitely very interesting to see the difference in the two. The SOI, though, also definitely indicates El Nino is coming on strong, especially if you've been watching the SOI for the last several weeks. And pretty much for the last 30 days now, the SOI has been in the negatives. We've been in the negatives all the way since early April, and the latest 30-day average from the SOI is now -7. And as I always say, we need at least -7 in order for the SOI to officially kind of be in El Nino mode atmospherically. And that's certainly been the case pretty much, again, since early April. We've kind of gone up a little bit over the last few days, but we're still negative. And let's see why we've actually gone up. Probably because we did have one day today, actually today, literally, of a positive daily contribution to the SOI. So that, obviously does affect the average a little bit, but what's definitely helped tank the SOI, on the other hand, is these multiple stretches of days on end where we've had very, very negative values of the SOI. In fact, one here from the beginning of the time frame of the index, April 10th, we had a daily contribution as low as -33, and we also had similarly very, very low negative values here roughly about 2 weeks ago. So that definitely says that the atmosphere is beginning to respond like an El Nino, and El Nino is coming for sure, especially when you look at the latest climate model data from the European, and I'll show you the NMME in a second, which is even more incredible, but you've probably already seen it online. But all of the models now are agreeing on what will probably be a very, very strong El Nino event. This is the European by the time we get to June, July, August. And obviously this is for this month's run. And just look at how warm the Pacific is. Look at how especially warm the Eastern Pacific is as well. And that's something that we're obviously going to focus on more in today's video. But especially look here at the Eastern Pacific, at the equatorial Pacific as a whole. And in the equatorial Pacific, we have widespread anomalies here indicated by the Euro of 2 degrees Celsius and higher. So that is that super Nino threshold. And this is already showing up, crazily enough in the June, July, and August time period. So you can only imagine just how strong the Euro actually gets with the El Nino forecast. And then we have the NMME, which came out also roughly just about a day or two ago. And they show really strong. These shades here, the gray is as strong as 3 degrees Celsius. And there has been an increasing amount of models over the last several weeks that have been showing a 3 degrees Celsius forecast for the El Nino. And that is absolutely wild. If that were to actually happen, that would be the strongest El Nino on record, at least in, recent history. And this is by the time we get to November. So a little bit of a difference. This is more likely when we will be seeing peak intensity of this El Nino. But still very, very wild. And just showing you these two models to kind of segue into one of the main factors for this hurricane season in the Pacific, and that'll be El Nino. And why is El Nino important? Well, just to sum it up for you, the typical influence of an El Nino is obviously very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies here along the equator, which leads to, in general, more hurricanes because of more favorable conditions being focused in the Pacific. And obviously, as a result, as you've been probably hearing about, we're probably going to have a less active hurricane season in the Atlantic. And atmospherically, what El Nino does, the reason why conditions are more favorable is because the warmer waters in the Pacific allow for more rising motion to occur. And basically all of the thunderstorm activity, which would allow for tropical cyclone activity to arise, of course, would be favored and would be concentrated in the Pacific because of El Nino. And, obviously, number one, we're expecting an El Nino, so that already tips the scale in favor of the Pacific, but especially when we have both of the models here potentially very strongly indicating super El Nino for this year, that definitely just makes things even more favorable. It's like, having La Nina conditions in the Atlantic, or we have La Nina conditions, but we also have a record warm Atlantic. What do you think the logical forecast will be? And that is for a hyperactive, extremely active hurricane season in the Atlantic. You can kind of apply that same logic as well to the Pacific. We have El Nino conditions that will favor the Pacific, but having a very, very strong El Nino as well will only amplify those favorable conditions. So probably you would expect just by those two factors alone, we could potentially have a very active hurricane season. But obviously, things that happen in theory do not always happen in practice. So let's take a look back at the last few times that we had very favorable setups for the Pacific, obviously including strong El Ninos, the last few strong El Ninos, and let's see what those hurricane seasons produced. So obviously the base that we're going to use is how things are looking like so far this year. And actually, by the way, I'm going to compare how this year looks like so far to how the last several years that we had strong El Ninos and very active Pacific hurricane seasons look like. And obviously, we have very, very warm Pacific, two things that we should be looking for as we compare. We start off very, very warm Pacific here, and obviously a very strongly developing El Nino. Like the climate models are showing, we might potentially get to super El Nino threshold this year. And let's compare this year first to 1997, one of the last times we had a very strong El Nino. And in fact, 1997 is often credited as the strongest El Nino on record. I thought 2015 was at first, but I think due to the latest methodology change, it turns out 97 was a stronger El Nino. And very interestingly enough, first of all, you can see here, similar to this year, we have a tongue of warm water already very prominent off the equatorial Pacific coast near South America, very similar to this year. But interestingly enough, the northern Pacific was not as warm. In fact, almost looks like we kind of have a negative PDO setup here in the Pacific compared to this year. What about 2015? Very, very warm Pacific with the very warm sea surface temperature anomalies here in South America, and much more like this year, a very, very warm Eastern Pacific, Northern Eastern Pacific, or more like tropical Eastern Pacific, and the Pacific this year. And I'll show you how these hurricane seasons actually panned out in just a little bit. The Pacific this hurricane season in 2015 was very active. In fact, it was one of the most active Pacific hurricane seasons on record. And this year, 2015, we ended up getting Hurricane Patricia. So that is very interesting that you could compare these 2 years, and they definitely look pretty similar. We have the warm anomalies already stretching through the entire equatorial Pacific, but also the very, very warm pool as well in the tropical Pacific near the Baja Peninsula. And then there's 2018, another very active year in the Pacific. And once again, I'll show you the statistics on all of these years in just a little bit. But that year as well, we had a very warm northern Pacific. Probably, well, if you compare it to this year, we are much, much warmer this year. But I would say the expansiveness of the warmth is probably more similar in 2018. But that year, we did have an El Nino. It's kind of complicated. We did have an El Nino, but it was not very strong. And very interestingly enough, though, we still ended up having a very, very active Pacific season this year. So El Nino is not similar, but the extreme warmth here of at least the kind of, I guess, the shape of the warmth, the expansiveness of the warmth here in the Eastern Pacific, you could say is kind of similar. And then we have 2023, the last very strong El Nino event, which was just a few years ago. And definitely similar here with the warmth building off of the South American coastline, although you could say that 2023 was warmer. But obviously the main difference, interestingly enough, was we had a much colder northern Pacific compared to what we have this year. But what did 2023 produce? Even though we had strong El Nino with a colder northern Pacific, in contrast, we still ended up having a very, very active hurricane season that year in the Pacific. We had 17 named storms, 10 hurricanes, and 8 major hurricanes. Quite a high number of major hurricanes, I know, and I'm actually very interested in this number, and I'll explain to you why in just a little bit, and I'll kind of keep you on your toes. But we also had an ACE of 165, which is a hyperactive hurricane season, at least by Atlantic standards, although I'm pretty sure in the Pacific as well, it also applies too. And then looking at 2018, not very similar with El Nino, but warm, but similar in the expansiveness of the warmth here in the northern Pacific. And 2018 was the highest ACE producing hurricane season on record in the Pacific. And this year we did not have a strong El Nino, and obviously, especially once again, looking at these 2 years, you could see we are warmer than we were in 2018, and this was the result. So very interesting indeed. There's also 2015 as well. That year, a near record hurricane season for them. We had 26 named storms in the Pacific that year. 16 hurricanes and 11 major hurricanes, both record high amounts for their respective category. And 2015 was obviously the other Super El Nino we had. And then obviously there is 1997, which was a pretty active year, I must say. 7 major hurricanes, 9 hurricanes total, 19 storms. Definitely a very active season, and all comparable to the setup that we have this year. So if you would want to assume kind of taking a combination of those numbers, you could say we definitely have a very active Pacific hurricane season in the making. And then comparing, we took a look at the past few years compared to what the models are showing already for this year. And, models that do calculate forecasted activity, like the European, they're already forecasting, you could already see the hints of a very active hurricane season prediction. The Euro is forecasting 17 named storms in the Pacific, 10 hurricanes, and ACE, interestingly enough, I'm not sure why, but the ACE forecast is roughly average. But, especially taking a look at years like 2015 and 2018 here, where we had near record activity, or pretty much record activity in both cases that year. I am pretty sure that the ACE for the Pacific this year is not at all going to be average. In fact, we're probably going to see a season well above average. And then finally, what really puts things into perspective, and I think it really reflects all these years very well, 2023, 2018, and 2015. Just look at the European tropical storm density, and this is pretty much a forecast of where the Euro generally thinks we will have the highest concentration of storm formations. And just look at the entire Pacific here. It's kind of weird because, unfortunately, there was no option to, centralize the Pacific as the central point in the map. Although I really do think that they should make that an option, because it would make my, point much more clear here. But you could see in the Pacific, lots of red showing up. And of course, on the key here, red is enhanced expected value. So predictably, lots of activity expected in the Pacific here, especially in the Central Pacific, which will be very interesting for Hawaii potentially this year. And one thing I will note of some of these seasons, 2018, we had Hurricane Molaka that year, which was a very, very strong Central Pacific hurricane, and Hurricane Lane as well. If you remember, Lane was a very, very hyped up storm for Hawaii. There was a lot of potential that Lane would hit Hawaii, but it ended up veering away at the last minute. And then 2015 as well, record activity, near record activity in terms of the Eastern Pacific totals, but a lot of it was driven by very, very active Central Pacific activity, which tends to be a theme in strong El Ninos that year. So you could also see that reflected as well with what the models are forecasting for this year. So the bottom line is a very, very active hurricane season is coming up in the Pacific, thanks to the strong El Nino this year. But of course, just how active, we'll have to wait and see. But I have a feeling it is probably going to be very, very active, especially compared to what we have seen in the last several years. And I'm going to give my own input on what I believe exactly of what will happen in the Pacific this year, because I decided to make a nice little graphic for you guys. Coming up over the next several weeks now, as we are in the month of May, we're getting closer and closer towards hurricane season. Obviously, May 15th is going to be the start of the Pacific hurricane season, as I've said, and I think as you all know by now. And on May 15th, I am going to release my own personal forecast for the Pacific. So, kind of using today's video as a hint of what I think will be coming up for the Pacific hurricane season this year, and also using, today as a hint for what I'm potentially going to do for my forecast on May 15th, which is coming out, of course, next week. And obviously, since the Pacific hurricane season will be starting next week, I'm also going to start doing daily videos. So if you've been following my channel for the last, several months or so, or if you've been a long time subscriber, which I thank you for that very much. Thank you for sticking around for a long time. I typically do these off-season videos, when we are not during the hurricane season, on a weekly basis on Saturday. But since we're going to be beginning hurricane season in the Pacific next week, I'm going to be doing these videos on a daily basis starting next week on May 15th, all the way till the end of the hurricane season for both basins, the Pacific and the Atlantic, on November 30th. And then after that, the next major date is the start of the Atlantic hurricane season, which will begin on June 1st. And we're going to have a lot of things coming up on June 1st, specifically on this channel, including a live stream that I typically do on the night of June 1st. And I'm going to be releasing my Atlantic hurricane season predictions as well. So a lot coming up over the next several weeks here as we continue throughout the month of May. And obviously with that, we will be finding out very shortly as well, as the Pacific hurricane season is coming up, just how active things are going to be in the Pacific. But if you took a message away from today's video, I have a feeling it is probably going to be a very, very active season. But of course, I will kind of lay that out for you in a detailed forecast coming up next week. So make sure to stay tuned for that. But thanks for joining me on today's video. Hope you enjoyed what you saw today. If you did, I would really appreciate if you give this video a like, comment your thoughts below, ask questions. If you want to make your own prediction for the Pacific hurricane season this year, post it in the comments. And if you want to do an Atlantic prediction as well, go ahead and do that in the comments as well. And actually, one more note though, I will be posting my Pacific prediction on Twitter instead of YouTube. So if you haven't followed me on Twitter yet, make sure to do so at Danilo Evangelista. Just search my name up on Twitter and it'll probably come up very quickly. And I've also been getting a lot of traction on Twitter as well. So if you are coming here from Twitter and you also just recently followed me on Twitter, I thank you for that and I hope you enjoy my content. But with that being said, enjoy the rest of your weekend, enjoy the rest of your week ahead, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.